From Washington, D.C., I'm Blake Newman.
I'm Brie Ripley, and this is the Agile Podcast, where we explore the stories and people behind Agile web solutions.
So we spent the last few weeks talking about Drupal 7's end of life, how to approach migration in an agile way, the alternatives to Drupal 7, and where to migrate.
Today, we talk about how to migrate, and more importantly, who should migrate your Drupal 7 site.
And every organization is different. Some have in-house developers, while others rely on contractors. Even if you have in-house developers, they may have their hands full just keeping things working.
Yeah, just like kind of doing their jobs.
And in that case, organizations may need to contract out the Drupal migration because it requires an intense surge of energy to get the job done. So today, we'll talk about finding and hiring contractors to migrate your website. Brie, you run D7 on your website. Do your developers have the capacity to take on an extra task like a migration?
I mean, the answer is kind of. They have their hands in a lot of different things for sure, but they're not looking forward to the migration.
No, it's a huge effort. And since D7 is going away, not only do you have to upgrade the content management system, which is a herculean effort in itself, but management may want to make some changes to the design, which adds even more work. It's like triple the work. Obviously, there won't be enough time or money to do everything you want, so you'll need to prioritize.
That's where Agile comes in. It's a method for prioritizing.
In an ideal world, you would freeze everything so you can migrate the site out of Drupal 7. But that's not always possible to wait for the launch of a new website to make changes.
Oh yeah, so let's just say, for instance, you work at a global health nonprofit and you need to migrate, but then a pandemic happens.
Like yourself? Good example. You can't just freeze your site for 6 months in the middle of a pandemic while you migrate. 6 months is like an eternity during a pandemic. Add to that, everything you do in D7 needs to be redone in the new CMS. So whatever changes you make in D7 while migrating to D8 is a duplicate effort, which adds more to the workload.
Yikes.
Yeah, and keeping track of all these changes, as well as the changing conditions of the world around us, that can get complicated. Carlos, who we've heard from in the past, is a Drupal developer at Angelina.
In a perfect world, you should focus on one single thing.
Let's say like a migration?
That's not possible with big projects that need more features to be implemented.
So there's a lot going on during a migration. An in-house Drupal team can probably hardly keep up with everything. Outsourcing will likely be inevitable.
Right. It takes almost as many people to migrate as it does to maintain a Drupal site. In fact, sometimes even more. So some organizations won't really have a choice but to contract that work out. Carlos says assembling a team to migrate is one of the first things you should do when starting a migration.
The difficult process of finding a good set of developers to put out a team that can handle migrating a site, it's also I think that a factor. If you don't have the team, if you don't have the brain power, it's going to be difficult to even start planning on migrating a huge site.
So you outsource. But how do you find and evaluate competent Drupal developers? How do you know if they are truly qualified and experienced?
I'm going to introduce you to Ashraf Abed. He's a Drupal developer who's worked on a lot of big projects. He runs a Drupal school called Debug Academy. But his story with Drupal starts when he was a software engineer waiting on a security clearance for a government contract.
So it's a bit of a funny story. I was working as a software engineer at Northrop Grumman, and I was told my security clearance would take 2 years to process. So they essentially temporarily furloughed me.
But in the meantime, Ashraf got a call from a random recruiter
asking if I knew Drupal. And I said, it depends on when the interview is. He said he could push it back 2 weeks. So I spent those 2 weeks. I picked up a pro Drupal development book and I read it end to end and passed the interview and landed the job. And that's essentially when I heard about Drupal for the first time, and I've been doing it full time ever since.
And you just learned Drupal in 2 weeks and became an expert in it? I'm not mad.
Well, not exactly. It's not like Neo from the Matrix where all of a sudden it's like, I know Kung Fu. He didn't really know about the community for a long time. The first job he had, he would build all the custom modules on his own, which really isn't best practice.
And best practices in Drupal are really important. Like, sure, you can teach yourself Drupal, but the way you code something may be totally different than the way someone else does it. When you switch off on a project, using the same method will make things easier.
Yeah, for example, in the early Drupal days, some developers would put content or functionality into their templates. Problem is, whenever the next developer comes by and changes the template, you've lost all your content and functionality. So over time, the community realized that the best practice was to separate content and functionality from the template.
Yeah, in an open source community, they develop a culture and standards and best practices that lead to the creation of high quality code.
Ashraf says that this was a shortcoming of learning Drupal from a book.
Being self-taught from a book meant I didn't meet a single person from the Drupal community. Within the company, I really had no mentors. It was a very small company, and I was the only developer on a Drupal project for about 2 years. And let's just say I wrote a lot of custom modules, because when you read a book that teaches you how to make modules in Drupal, you don't realize, or at least I didn't realize, you should be finding modules on Drupal.org before you build them.
Yikes, yeah. I can relate to this for sure on the mentorship aspect. When I first started out in public radio, my mentor connected me with listservs, resources, and just so many people in radio who were willing to generously offer me their time and advice. I had so many coffee dates. So Ashraf could do his Drupal job, but he wasn't always tuned into what was going on in the Drupal community.
And he was, at times, just hacking it, not necessarily using best practices, but still getting the job done. Debug Academy was created to teach best practices and to introduce developers to the community.
Sure, I was self-taught and I got a job. And then 3 years later, I realized, oh, I actually kind of didn't learn it correctly. And so I thought, it's not enough to tell people to go teach themselves.
So he runs this school. He's a highly sought-after developer. He's worked on some top-secret government projects, and in the past even worked on whitehouse.gov.
Just a little old site that we talk about from time to time.
Right. It was one of the turning points for Drupal when the Obama administration decided to power whitehouse.gov with Drupal. It was like Drupal's coming out party. It legitimized it as an enterprise-level CMS, which is where D8 and D9 is heading today.
Okay, so speaking of Drupal 8 or 9, let's say I'm contracting someone out to migrate there. How do I know if someone is using best practices on a Drupal site?
I mean, one way is to go through someone like Debug Academy. They have a great track record. Ashraf says that if you're having trouble finding developers, you can just contact him. They have mentorship programs too, but you can also look for certifications, specifically Acquia certifications.
And Acquia is a big deal in the Drupal community. They were started by Drupal's founder,
Dries Beitart.
Yeah.
And they host big Drupal sites, enterprise-level sites, multi-million-dollar Drupal websites. But they also have a certification program. Gordon, who's a Drupal architect, has some of the most highly coveted Acquia certifications in the world. He's a double Grand Master, meaning that he's a Grand Master in both Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. There are less than 50 people in the world with those qualifications. Gordon remembers things as kind of a wild west of Drupal about a decade ago.
Back in the day, I want to say I was at a consultancy around 2010, 2012.
That's Gordon.
All sorts of development shops would say, yeah, we do Drupal, no problem. And they would bid on projects. And then at this place I was at, invariably, we weren't the cheapest, so we wouldn't get a project. But then invariably a month later, we would get a call saying, yeah, the people they went with, who underbid us by X number of dollars got the project. And they really didn't know Drupal. And they kind of shot themselves in the foot. And the client has been is no longer happy with them. And so they came to us.
So they didn't know Drupal.
Or at least not as well as the client would like. And there was a high demand for Drupal developers. So Acquia came up with some tests and certifications because they were hiring Drupal developers too and needed verifiable proof that they were getting the real deal.
So they came up with a certification program so that they could start, testing these people that said they knew Drupal so that, they would actually know that people actually knew what they were doing.
And that's the Acquia certification. In fact, when I hire Drupal developers, I look first for grandmasters. Those are like full-stack developers. They've mastered the front end and the back end. If they don't already have an Acquia certification, I make earning that certification a prerequisite to getting hired. That's how important these certifications are to me.
And the alternative to getting an Acquia certification is what?
Pinky promise, I guess. You just have to trust that when people say they can do this or have done this, they're telling the truth.
Got it. And if I'm hiring someone to migrate a site, I can look at projects they've done in the past, which might look great, but I might not know if they're following best practices, which might mean a headache down the road. They might be a Drupal hacker.
Exactly. Drupal hacker, which could be really dangerous because if you don't know what you're doing, then your site could crash. It could get hacked. It could be very difficult to perform any kind of root cause analysis in a short period of time. And for Acquia certifications, this is where best practices come into play. It's important for developers to know the right way to do Drupal. Gordon says that on Acquia certification test, you might be presented with multiple options for doing something, but there's only one right answer.
There's certain questions where there's certain answers that are clearly wrong, and there's a couple that could be right, but they want the best answer. So there's a couple of different ways to do anything in Drupal, and it's like, oops, you might have chosen the one that was not exactly the accepted answer, but it would still get the job done.
Okay, so do I need an Acquia certified developer?
Well, I'm sure you don't need that tall, short Starbucks macchiato wappuccino with caramel cream sauce, but people order it anyway.
Attack. I feel personally attacked. Okay. Oh, now what about a certification for someone who is easy to work with and communicative?
Like you? Maybe one day.
Yeah, I guess you can't test for that kind of genius.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. This also brings up the subject of leadership, particularly servant leadership. It's one thing to hire an Acquia Drupal Grandmaster, but you also need a leader who can remove obstacles so developers can do their best work. This is where Agile comes into play. The whole concept of Agile software development is meant to ensure more successful outcomes. So Brie, how do you, the client, find professionals who you're able to work with?
Well, let me tell you, they oftentimes just cold outreach via LinkedIn to me, mostly based on, my job title. They probably are looking for digital marketing officers who are savvy and aware that Drupal 7's expiring.
So when people contact you on LinkedIn, then, how do you know they're legitimate? How do you know that they're qualified?
Yeah, good question. The first thing that I do is I check out their LinkedIn, and then I click on a couple of links if I'm interested in exploring more about what kind of work they do and if they might be a good consultant fit for the work that I'm doing at my organization. And, I judge a website by its cover for sure.
So you look at their past performance and the websites they say they've worked on then, I guess.
Yeah, I check out their portfolio. I check out to see what they look like. I'm not somebody that judges a book by its cover, but I judge a website by it.
Okay. Well, in my organization, I look not only for Acquia certifications, but also Agile certifications. If I'm hiring a project manager, I would like them to be a certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Product Owner, and a Scaled Agilist.
Okay.
And I would like to see that Scrum Master also have an Acquia certification, which means that they understand the basics of how Drupal works and is configured.
Got it. Is that all?
Just getting started. Ideally, every person on the team will have read The Elements of Scrum and The Agile Samurai, two of the best books ever written on Agile. And it just helps keep everybody on the same page.
Now, is that all?
Pretty much. I can get clues from their LinkedIn profile about how agile they are. If they write things like sprint, Kanban, retrospectives, then I get the feeling that they're agile oriented. Ultimately, I want a team of agile enthusiasts.
Okay, so now what? You understand whether or not you can do things in-house. If you decide to outsource, you understand that you may need to hire one or two people or perhaps an entire Scrum team. So what's next?
Well, assuming you decide to outsource a project like this, you're going to need to talk about money. In some cases, a lot of it.
Yeah, least favorite subject.
So in future podcasts, we'll talk about how to estimate the cost of migration.
And the amount of time to do a migration.
So smash the subscribe button on the Agile podcast.
Wait. We said we were going to talk about how to migrate and who would migrate. So far, we have talked about the who, but not the how.
Oh, yeah, you're right, Brie. Let me just say a couple things at a high level. When it comes to migrating out of Drupal 7 or replacing a content management system entirely, there are three basic components to the website. One, the theme,
which represents the design of the templates.
2, the configuration.
which represents permissions and settings.
3, the functionality.
Which represents actions people can do.
And I guess there's a 4th, the content.
Which represents information, data, and media.
When you go from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, 9, or 10, or to another CMS like WordPress, or outside of the CMS world altogether, pretty much the entire website needs to be rebuilt.
You might be able to automate the migration of the content. Maybe. But pretty much everything else needs to be redone.
A front-end developer needs to rebuild the theme. A back-end developer needs to rebuild the functionality. A sysadmin needs to configure the settings. And you'll need a team of people testing the site to ensure that everything is working as it should before you relaunch.
At a minimum, this could take weeks. More likely, it could take months. Worst case, it could take years.
So in future podcasts, we'll talk about how to estimate the cost of a migration.
And the amount of time to do a migration.
And now you can smash that subscribe button on the Agile Podcast, on Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And won't you please leave a review while you're at it? It would help us so very much. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Talk to you soon. The Agile Podcast is produced by Agilina, a DC-based web development company. To learn more about Agilina, you can visit our website, agilina.com, or send us an email to results@agilina.com. That's AGILEANA.com.